Hello everybody and welcome to the Talking Time Let's Play for Final Fantasy XIV of Reborn. I'm McDole, and in this video companion today we're going to be talking about the first tier of the Binding Coil of Bahamut. And I'm here with a guest. Hello guest.
Hi, I'm Mighty Blue. I'm also on the Talking Time forums, and I'm sort of one of the resident lore nerds for 14 as well.
And lore nerds are exactly what we're going to need today, because where is Satsun Sweet today, and what is she doing?
So this is the first raid tier for Final Fantasy XIV. This was released roughly a month after the Realm Reborn relaunch, and it serves as sort of a denouement for the 1.0 storyline.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on how into the weeds you get, the only really relevant part of the 1.0 story you need to know is that Garlemald invaded 5 years previous to ARR, and the legatus in charge of that project, one Nail Van Darnus, summoned Meteor, or Dalamud, to crash into the Yorzian countryside, basically at the Cartano Fields.
Yep.
What the first 5 tiers serve as sort of a tease as to that, and then the following 2 tiers will go into depth on the lore details and the justification for Nail's involvement, why Dalamud, why Bahamut, all the fun stuff you see in the AR intro cinematic.
Yeah, that delicious answers teaser that they put up after they shut down 1.0, right?
Yep, you can easily find that in YouTube. About half of that, or 2/3 really, is built into the AR intro cinematic, sort of the whole Bahamut blowing up everything, and it transitions into the, a new world type bit.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, the conceit here is that Bahamut wasn't killed or sealed away properly at the end of 1.0. It's a mystery of what happened, because 1.0 ends with Bahamut starting to blow up everything, and the player characters are teleported away to the future by Louisoix.
And nobody really knows what happened after that. It's kind of a big
Correct.
old shrug emoji at the moment.
Yes, apparently whatever time magic Louisoix did also put a memory lock on everyone who witnessed the event in some fashion. So the deeds of the player characters are sort of a mystery. They know they existed, they know they did things, but they don't know who the original Warriors of Light were. And if you're a legacy character, they remember that at the end of Praetorium, as the defeats Ultimo up and unseals all the memories. And here you get a teaser shot of what looks like a tall Elzen in a coat on that ledge before disappearing. That's Louisoix.
Who could it be? Oh, well, way to give the game away there. Oh,
you see him in the intro cinematic, doing the whole staring at the Mega Flare thing. It's it's a tease of why he's here, not so much who he is. And you'll get that in the third final tier, because that's where all the juiciest bits are.
That's where the tasty stuff is, and I can't wait to get to that. So we were talking over it, but there was like a door boss, that ADS ball, which kind of looks like one of the CPU enemies from Final Fantasy IV, and now we have piles and piles of trash.
Yeah, so the easiest way to phrase this is that the AR raid scene was patterned to make a Final Fantasy style WoW raid scene. Basically, you don't have the dedicated raid wings, but there's a lot of field stuff involved, especially in this first tier where you're got the big lead up to the actual raid boss with trash and intro door bosses and the like that will get compressed further down as you go in later tiers, and the entire style will develop and change as you go through expansion packs.
By the time we get to Stormblood, it's just boiled down to the boss fights. There are a couple of solo duties in Stormblood that kind of serve the same purpose that these trash lead-ups are. But for the actual raids themselves, it's just the boss fights. And we'll see that kind of start to get pared away as we go into Heavensward, but for now, this is the kind of, like he said, the WoW lead up style. So this is the first boss. Like I said, I'm relying a lot on Mighty Blue's experience for binding Coil, and eventually when we get to Heaven's Word, I'll be relying on several of my other fellow raiders who know who lived through this as it was relevant content. So basically, this is basically an excuse to let Mighty Blue rap as much as possible, and I would actually bring up my own questions about it.
Yeah, the first raid series as a whole, all the Bahamut fights are very heavy on control and positioning. Like everything dies instantly now, like in the video, but when this was current, when you got the boss around like 2/3, it would split into two halves, and they would tether and become stronger, if they were close together. So you had to pull them apart, and you basically have to simultaneously DPS them down, because whichever one would survive at the end would get even further buffed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's stuns, silences. That door boss has ADS had an attack called High Voltage that need to be silenced, otherwise it would do heavy AoE and stun the party. And that would basically kill everyone at the gear levels that would have been current for new raiders at the time.
Fun fact, High Voltage is an ability you can learn on Blue Mage.
And the second turn is basically a development of that ADS door fight. Basically, you have a succession of nodes. Each node will have a particular ability it uses, and if you kill certain nodes, you will seal certain abilities on the final boss that correspond to what these particular nodes do, which will limit the final boss in ways, but you're also fighting a roughly 10-minute hard enrage, or soft enrage rather, because once it hits 10 minutes, the core boss will start casting High Voltage repeatedly every time it finishes casting, which is like 3 or 4 seconds. It's like 1 or 2 GCDs.
So the question I have here is that the pathway in here splits up. So was it like traditional for groups to split up into light parties to burn both sides down as quickly as possible? Or
you could do it that way. There's like 2 or 3 different ways you could approach this, because the left path is more physical, ability oriented, and the right side is more magic. So if you were aiming to, I think the physical side was generally agreed upon to be the easiest, so most parties would go down the right side and they'd kill 2 or 3 nodes and then go to the final boss, which is another ADS.
Yeah.
Now this one's a little bit special. It will do all of the signature abilities of all the other nodes unless they've been sealed. That's those 4 buffs you see. It also has an additional signature ability called Allegan Rot. Now, if you played WoW, this is somewhat familiar. I think it's one person will get a time debuff. The debuff expires, they die. And so the way to beat the mechanic is you have to pass it on to another party member, and that will remove your debuff and give the renewed debuff to the next person with the resistance on you, or whoever originally had it. And you have to do a sort of roundabout passing it as you're fielding the other boss mechanics, basically.
So yeah, you mentioned Allegan Rot. We'll get back to that. That'll come back much later when we go to Stormblood's raiding scene. But anyway, we're on to the third turn already, which is affectionately called the jumping puzzle.
Yeah, there's no boss in here. The entire point is to reach the bottom. It's thematic pacing, I guess you'd call it, because we're going deeper into this crashed bit of Allegan fuckery. And yeah, the entire point is to reach the bottom. If you've been paying attention to the mob names, a lot of them are like Dark Matter, What's It's, or Allegan Chimera type deals, which will, if you pay attention to the lore later on, this will give you a clue as to the origin of most of the monsters in here. And the ones that are named differently are typically like individual creatures and not just mass-produced copies to pad the runtime out, I guess would be the best way to put it.
I mean, this is all purposefully built by the Allegans to do awful things, so...
Yeah, and that'll get covered later in the Coil series. All you know right now is that the Empire basically had a research facility delving into the underground, and it's connected to these Allegan ruins that have all this corrupted crystal in it. but you're also getting Bahamut's Aether signal from down in here too, so that's why Alisei sends you in to investigate, basically.
Yeah. And basically, if you're looking to progress down here, which all you really have to do is just jump through the hoop, get on these jump pads that will direct you through the hoops that are floating in the air, and that'll take you deeper and deeper.
Yeah, you basically want to go, I think it's counterclockwise. If you see the occasional, like, interactable to activate an elevator, you know you're going in the right spot. So,
yeah. So, you see in the footage here, we're just kind of following the path by going through the circle, and you can see deeper down, we're coming closer to the end of it. It's kind of tricky to move around sometimes. The pads take a second to activate.
Yeah, and the fun thing is that the mobs aren't restricted to the actual pathing, I guess. They will, like, slowly float down through the air to follow you for the most part, except for the golems, I think. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah, the way to do it back in the day is everyone would just do a mad dash for the bottom, and you'd see this giant conga train of ads gently floating down, through the air towards the party.
That's amazing, and I kind of want to see that now. What was I going to say? So, how is now? Usually, with the way raids are now, is like you spend a couple of days, like depending on how hardcore into it you are, you spend a couple of sessions of raid time, whatever that might be, on a particular mechanic, and it's kind of gradual progression throughout a fight. How is the progression in this? Because you have an entire turn where all you're doing is just jumping through hoops, like literally. How did this turn shape up as far as progression goes?
I mean, it was your break after having to deal with the ADS. Mm-hmm. It's a giant pain in the butt if you do it the proper way. The way most of the American raiding community did was to kill the important physical side ones and then sit outside the ADS chamber until it started, right before it started the softener rage. And then with the white mage and a scholar, you could basically heal through it until like the healers MP bottom out eventually. But most people were sufficiently geared enough by that point where you could burn down the ADS, in time.
Okay.
There wasn't really any meta at this point. I mean, I think parsing was barely even a thing, and no one really understood what, all the the various combat mechanics, like the numbers, really at that point so far. Mm-hmm. And especially right away early on, there was some glaring balance problems with a couple jobs. Warrior was completely broken, Scholar was sort of iffy, and Bard was completely overpowered for what was probably intended, and definitely intended.
Alright, so we're on the fourth turn now, and go ahead and finish your thought.
Yeah, the first major patch basically fixed a lot of problems with basically bugs in the raid tier itself and with the jobs. Bard got nerfed pretty heavily, Warrior got fixed, and Scholar got fixed.
Mm-hmm. So this fourth turn here is basically a series of trash fights.
Yeah, there's no one boss. The idea is you have to... It's all control and positioning. Mm-hmm. There's DPS priorities. This is a junk fight. WoW, pure and simple, where the challenge isn't so much in killing everything, it's killing everything in the right order and positioning things so that bad things don't happen. Like, the dreadnoughts will eat these bugs and buff themselves and heal. You don't want that to happen, so usually one tank would pull the dreadnought and the other tank would pull the bugs away, and then you'd AoE the center. The spinner rooks do a thing called Pox. That's a debuff. That's basically a fight-long hit to max HP, and since tanks are pulling everything in the center, that's bad times ahead. Soldiers are physical, magical. There's two different kinds. One has like a physical damage barrier, one has a magic damage barrier, so you're ideally running two of both, two physical DPS, two magical DPS, and you'd prioritize each as you went, and then you'd pick up the dreadnoughts at the end. And there'd be successive waves of it at various timings, so if you were slow, you'd get, more ads coming in, which would usually result in a wipe. So there's a couple more trash fights, both in Bahamut and in the Heaven's Ward raid series, but after that, they pretty much killed them off because they're not particularly challenging. It's a numbers game. Once you solve it, it's done. Really, there's no mechanics to memorize or anything like that.
A fun little thing that just from a series train spotting standpoint is that you'll notice that like the clockwork soldiers and the dreadnoughts are enemy models from Final Fantasy 13, and basically they incorporate a lot of the Final Fantasy 13 stuff gets kind of incorporated as to be Allagon technology. But we got story here, and it's pretty clear we're on a giant claw that belongs to Bahamut, or Bahamut's corpse, question mark?
You'll see it later, but Bahamut is a big boy. The scale is correct as far as like the video goes. This is in line with the cinematic scaling.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll notice this dragon that pops up has a weird collar around its neck. So this is telling you early on that you're not just fighting elegant monsters and bits of, technology. You're fighting actual dragons, which is your first sign that something weird is going on here. I think would probably be the most charitable way to put it, as far as enemies and stuff go.
So we have a little bit of extra footage time because we don't have we didn't burn this thing down fast enough to So Twintania just bolted, and now we're gonna do dive bombs.
Yeah, this was a fun mechanic checks. Her first real mechanics are fireballs on individuals and party members. Individuals would have to run away. The stack ones you'd have to stack. This is a mechanic that gets repeated a bunch in later Coil fights and across, the rest of the game. The big glowy puddle in the middle is a Neuralink puddle, which will completely nerf certain dragon attacks. And it's necessary to survive some of her mechanics when you're running this synced. The typical strat is to drop it in the center as best you can, because that's just where the positioning works out. The dive phase here is another little fun bit. It was completely broken in the original release. I forget the exact details, but basically, because this isn't a perfectly flat arena, there are ways you can break the targeting of these dive attacks. The one that survives is there's a little, like, where the palm meets his wrist, basically, where there's a deep enough dip in the arena where everyone can stack in that dip, and then when you get that dive bomb signal, you can run up to top and then run back down on a certain timing, and you basically, everyone dodges all the dive bombs without being hit if you do it right.
And also, as you might imagine, the little flamey wall is instant death, so don't get knocked into it by these dive bombs.
Yep, and that's a staple for capstone raid tier fights. Ever since, if you touch the wall, you die at the final fight of a tier.
And these days, they're making it so you can easily quickly wipe no matter the raid tier, because in the current all four steps of the current raid tier in Shadowbringers, all four fights have some kind of insta death where you can easily and quickly wipe in case things aren't going well.
Yeah,
that became a quality of life kind of a deal.
Yeah, it's just an iterative design choice. It's sort of interesting to go back and see this and then see what gets carried forward and what doesn't, as far as Coil, like, not even just fight design, but like the environments, the structure of the the raid as a whole, that sort of thing.
Yep. And that's gonna do it for the first turn, the first tier. Thank you very much, Mighty Blue, for hanging out and talking about this.
Yeah, no problem. I'm always happy to talk about random lore things at length.
Well, speaking of which, I might have you come back for the next one that I do of these, where I have people on when we talk about Crystal Tower and whatnot.
Sure. Yeah, I'm more than happy to.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for watching, and I'll see you next time for more of the video companion to the Talking Time Let's Play of Final Fantasy XIV. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.